Hello, everybody. I didn't know what to say, if it's good evening or good morning as it is for Ron. But anyway, greetings to everybody who has joined us in this webinar. My name is Roxolana Vronovska. Who doesn't know me, I am the CEO of LVBS Consulting, and I have the great privilege to moderate today's discussion with Ron. First of all, I would like to thank Ron for his initiative to be with us today. First, we had appointed the meeting with Rita. Probably a few of you visited that webinar as well, and then she wrote to me, Ron, my partner, also would like to contribute and to meet with your students and your community, and that was really a great surprise and great honor for us. So thank you, Ron, again for all the different support, and you also told us how you support with your wife organization Save Children. We are really, really grateful. So Ron Boire is an American businessman, and he has a really significant experience in running huge companies. He served as an executive for several companies, including Sony Electronics, Best Buy, Barnes & Noble, Bookstore, Sears Canada. I mean, the list is really impressive. Ron also has MBAs from Columbia University and London Business School. And as I mentioned, he's also the partner with Rita in this company you see on his background, which is Valize. It's, as I understand, innovation consulting company. And Ron, with his wife together, is also running a charity foundation. And what I found and what I also liked a lot is that, as I understood, you bought this ancient property, yes, and you restored it together with your wife. And that's also, a very nice moment about you and your interests in life. So I will not take the time we have with you. Ron, the floor is yours. Just to mention the few, we can call them rules. Though we don't have any rules, you can ask the questions anytime you want, but please write your questions in chat. I will follow them. I will read them to Ron. And at first, Ron will present us a few of his ideas. And please, you can, just don't wait, as the time is limited, with your questions, so that we can take as many as we can. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. When Rita mentioned that she was doing this, I said, oh my God, that sounds like something wonderful to do. So I was really pleased that I was invited here to do this. I've been working diligently on my presentation. I have all these thoughts about crisis management, and I think you'll find there's one theme that is more important than any other, and I won't give away the punchline, but crisis management, like any leadership opportunity, is really built around some very basic principles. I am not using your current situation because I thought that would be very disrespectful. I'm going to use 3 examples from my past, talk about a framework and some examples from my past. So I'll just start this. If you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat so we don't forget them. And we'll get to as much as we can. I think we have more than an hour kind of blocked off, so hopefully we'll get to everybody's questions. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully this works. How am I doing? Can everyone see the screen? Okay, great. So there we go. As I said, I'm going to do a simple little overview on crisis management process and talk about some of the important aspects, and really it's all about planning, communication, and execution to kind of get through crisis management. I'm going to give 3 examples that I actually lived through, which were, I think, very important to me as a leader in my development of working with very tough situations. Then we can go into some open discussion. So To me, the most important aspect of crisis management is leadership, right? So there's really some basic fundamentals, right? Number one is clear, focused communication. What's happening? What is the exact situation that you're dealing with is obviously where you start. What are you going to do about it? What is the action you're going to take? And action is a key word in crisis management. And then how are you going to take those actions? And communicating those at every level in the organization is absolutely critical. So please, you have to keep in mind that you have internal and external constituents that need you, right? If you're in a crisis, there are people on your team, people in your group, people in your family, as you know well, that need you to act and need you to lead. And there's internal teams. So if you have a company or a university or whatever your organization may be, your internal team needs to know what they need to do and who gets to make decisions. There's also external constituents that need you. So those may be suppliers, they may be government agencies, and we'll talk about some of that. And the media. So you need to be able to communicate with those people. And the most important aspect, I believe, in crisis management is leading from the front. Being transparent. That means telling the truth, even when the truth really hurts. We made a mistake, and I'll talk about some of that in one of the examples that I used today. Be confident. It's really important. People want to know that someone's in charge, that there's a plan and someone's in charge. And even if you don't have the answers, you can be confident at your process. Be visible, right? So you need to be in the front lines. You need to be seen to lead. And, just a point on leadership, I have a fundamental philosophy that every person is a leader in some way. There's no such thing as people that are just leaders or just doers. Leaders do and doers lead, right? So it's critically important that everybody think that, they have a role in leading through a crisis and taking action and making decisions and making things happen. And be accessible, at every level in the organization. Access to leadership, access to resources are critical to getting through a crisis. So, ideally you start before a crisis really happens, right? So the process looks something like, what could go wrong? What's controllable and non-controllable? So what do I mean by that? Controllable crises could be, preventative. We've got a technology implementation and we're putting things in place to make sure that it doesn't actually occur. You have a team in place that understands what could go wrong in real time. And most crises are non-controllable. They're things that happen to you, right? So a vendor makes a mistake and ships you a bad product. There's an existential crisis, such as, I'll talk about one, such as 9/11 that happens to you. So gaming kind of what could go wrong. And then what could you do in both internal and external actions, right? So this is a critical part of it. So it's thinking through a problem before you actually have a problem. At one of the companies I was at, which is actually Sears, which was a huge US corporation, we had a huge logistics infrastructure at the company. And we were part of a Homeland Defense program, which used our infrastructure. So I won't talk about this case in detail, but when when Superstorm Sandy, there was a huge storm that hit New York City, the US government came to us and said, we need to use your infrastructure. We had planned out that process in advance through table exercises, as an example. So if there was a crisis, what would we be able to do? How would we move things like chainsaws and generators and water to a certain geography? I mentioned Save the Children before, another one that I'm not going to go into in detail. When I was at Toys R Us, we worked with Save the Children. We created pallets of things that children would need during a crisis. So if there's a hurricane, they need diapers, they need formula, they need onesies, they need everything, right? So these pallets were created and put in warehouses, and then a crisis happened and the pallets moved. So that's about advanced planning. Then who will act? Who's in the leadership roles? What functions will act? What teams are on the front line, and how will they act? All this should be done in kind of in the planning stages. Creating a crisis management plan. So, you know, it's critical that you at least have a framing of how you would go about managing a crisis. So creating the leadership team. The leaders need to be identified and in place prior to a crisis. So ideally, they're the people that will lead during a crisis and actually do the work. And crisis management, unlike other types of management, really requires strong leadership engagement. You can't have leaders on the sidelines sending emails saying, oh, you should do this or you should do that. They need to be out and being seen and in the process. And as I said, leaders happen at all levels of the organization. And some of the examples that I'm going to go through, we'll talk about that and how and what that looked like. But establishing the team that would manage a crisis, that can be as simple as, you know, here's a group of leaders, one from, you know, senior management, somebody from logistics, somebody from legal, however, whatever the team may be, that is your crisis management team. And they're the first people that respond when something bad happens. You need to have some risk assessment sessions. And that doesn't mean, and you never will, identify all of the risks. So for example, in one of the examples I cite, there's an issue that happened in the manufacturing side. We didn't plan for that. We didn't know it was going to happen, but we had a list of things that could happen, and we worked through those lists. You can create a catalog of those things. And I talked about table exercises at Sears. You then use those issues to evaluate the potential impacts. If this happens, what could the impact to the business be, and how do you work through those impacts? And all crises are different, right? And again, the examples I'm going to go through are 3 distinctly different kind of crises. So, and I think in only one of those situations had we ever kind of planned through what could potentially happen, because the other 2 we just simply did not expect to have happen. Then you create an action plan. Like, what would you do, right? So, you know, who would you talk to? How would you communicate? You know, what would be the step-by-step process that you might go through? Now, also realizing it's a very famous expression that, you know, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And what that means is you can plan all you want, but when something happens, it's always different. So having the flexibility, we'll talk about decision rights and how that works in a crisis, but having the flexibility once your plan is in place is absolutely critical. Stress testing your plan, look for errors, look for, you know, try to make the plan not work before you have to actually do it. And again, those can be table exercises as simple as, you know, you're in a room, and an exercise that I've frequently been through is you're in a room with this leadership team and somebody opens an envelope and says, here's your crisis, what would you do? Right. And then you find out that, oh, the way we communicate won't work because email didn't work. How would we communicate? Well, we're going to have to use text messaging. Well, do we have everybody's cell phone number? Well, you know, all of those things kind of lead to improving your plan. And then finally, keep it up to date. And again, I'll stress here that keeping up to date means keeping your thought process up to date more than keeping the plan up to date. You know, understanding that if there is a crisis, that you have a way to start managing the crisis. A great example of how this can fail is 9/11 in the US. When 9/11 happened in the US and those planes hit the World Trade Center, the emergency broadcast system in the US was never activated. So this is a national system for those of you who don't know. For years and years and years in the US, your television screen would pop up and it would say, this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. If there actually was an emergency, you'd be told what to do. These planes hit the towers and the US federal government forgot to turn the system on and tell people what to do. It never happened. So one of the things that's come out of 9/11 is now on your mobile phones, there's an emergency system that is out now kind of broadly used, but they had created this system. They had created the leadership team. They had done the risk assessment. They'd evaluated the impacts. They created an action plan. Theoretically, they stress tested that. And then when it happened, they didn't execute the plan. It's just an amazing fact that came out of 9/11. So I want to talk through three different cases and kind of what happened. So one is Sony at 9/11 and what happened I was the president of Sony Distribution at the time. Toys R Us in the lead paint crisis. And for those who don't know, there was a crisis in the US that involved harmful paint in children's toys, which is kind of a horrible thing. And Best Buy with Hurricane Katrina. I'm going to talk about those three things just really quickly. So when 9/11 hit, Sony's offices, we had offices in Manhattan and we had offices in North New Jersey, and obviously we're a global company. I was running the US operation, and the number one issue for us was, consumers in the US just stopped. They stopped buying, everything stopped. I mean, you folks are very familiar at a much larger scale than I am to that idea. We also had an issue where in Manhattan, we have very specific retailers that were impacted. We had one of our retailers, one of our largest customers called J&R Music, were literally at the base of the World Trade Center, and their business was destroyed. So, when this happened, we put together a group of cross-functional leaders to kind of look at this and say, kind of what would we do? And the biggest situation that we were facing was really information. So we had huge retailers like Walmart, like Target, like Circuit City at the time that, were all kind of reacting to the situation, but nobody really knew what was happening. So we created a system where we communicated. Just one example, I communicated directly with our biggest retailers in the country. We collected sales information. What were customers doing? What were they buying? We anonymized that information. So we made that information not identifiable to any particular retailer. And then we told the retailers what was happening. So we became this conduit for information that didn't exist. So we could say to retailer B, well, what's happening out there is people are buying a lot of this, they're acting like this, these situations are happening, and it kind of calmed our marketplace. The other thing that happened was it really kind of built our credibility as an industry leader, because people now trusted us. So they were giving us confidential information. We anonymized it and pushed it back out in the market and said, here's what's really going on. So that calmed our customers down. We also had customers that had really severe situations. So we had to make decisions that we would have never made before. So for example, our customer in New York, we gave them additional credit line. We suspended their payments. I don't think they paid us for almost a year, and we kept shipping them product. A year later, they were still in business and doing, surviving and coming back. And that retailer stayed in business for many, many years after 9/11, and they eventually sold their business just a few years ago. But had we done what it was traditionally done, they simply would have been wiped out, as many retailers would have. Another very important thing is we push decisions close to the problem. So we told our regional managers, if you have a customer in distress, make a decision. Don't stress your customers. Don't ask them for orders. Ask them how you can help. And again, that changed the outcome of a lot of our retailers. And then finally, within just a couple of weeks of 9/11, the leadership team hopped on an airplane and hit every office in the country. So we met with virtually every employee in the entire country and explained what we knew, what we didn't know, and what we were going to do to either find out the information or deal with a problem that we had. And that over-communication, face-to-face over-communication, was a huge credibility builder for the company and for the leadership team. So as a result, every one of our retailers survived the crisis. We saved one of our largest customers from bankruptcy and a lot of smaller customers. We improved team cohesion and attention to the mission, and trust in the brand was at all-time highs after 9/11. And it really was. We were an industry leader before 9/11, but after 9/11, we were kind of one of a kind because no one else did this. So the company came out stronger, our people came out stronger, and our customers came out stronger. So a great example of we had a plan going in, but we had no idea this was going to happen. No one in the world thought a plane would crash into the World Trade Center. It was inconceivable. And when it did, at least we had an idea of how we would behave. And I think that made a huge difference. The next situation is more of that was a business impact situation. The next one is more of a brand impact. So I say brand impact because there's really nothing that Toys R Us did that created this problem. And the problem initially started with Mattel, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with Mattel Company. They're the second largest toy company in the world, and the Barbie doll. If you had a Barbie doll, raise your hand. So the eyes on the Barbie doll were painted with a red paint that contained lead, dangerous levels of lead. So theoretically, a child could put the Barbie doll head in their mouth. And if you had Barbie dolls, you probably pulled the heads off them, and it could harm the child. This created a huge crisis in the toy industry because suddenly parents, moms, and dads were afraid to buy toys because of this lead contaminant. So we formed a SWAT team within our organization, merchants, finance, product sourcing, testing, legal, to understand the impact of this. And very quickly, we decided that because we were receiving toys from Mattel and others that were quickly found to have lead in them, that we needed to take a very aggressive leadership position. So we were aggressive in working with manufacturers and the US federal government to identify issues and recall and remove product from the market very quickly. So we could have taken two courses here. One course could have been, well, we fight this and say, oh, well, there's not really a problem with lead. Another course, which I call, kind of the judo course, is embrace it and say there is a problem and we're going to help solve it. And so ultimately, we worked with the Consumer Product Safety Commission in the US on creating new testing regulations. And Toys R Us, we actually testified in front of Congress, and there's a little blurb up there, supporting these regulations. So while we had on one side manufacturers fighting the regulations, we became an industry leader and said, no, not only are these regulations right, they actually need to be tougher. And the result of this was that our credibility in the market was extraordinarily high because people suddenly trusted us more than they trusted people like Mattel and Hasbro and others that had lead paint in their toys. We established new testing standards in Asia. So I'll give you a very quick story. I went to Asia to meet with one of our testing companies, and we asked them how they tested, right? And this is a huge global testing company. And one of the things we found out is they were parking in the parking spots of the owners of the factories. They were having lunch with the owners of the factories. We said, well, how can you possibly have lunch with the owners of the factory and then test the factory, right? So simple things like that, getting involved and being in the front line in changing regulations, really made a huge impact in the industry. And the other issue, and there's just one little blurb on the note here, but continuous communication to the public about what was going on. We educated the public. So we took this crisis and said, listen, we have an opportunity to change the world, to do something different. And now, because of that, Toys R Us was considered, an industry leader in safety. So in a situation where it started with, oh my God, you're selling toys that could hurt my children, at the end became, you're the people protecting my children. So huge win. And many crises actually look like this, where if you embrace the issue and you become a leader in the issue, you actually come out of the issue much better off. The third example is Best Buy. And this is another example of a crisis that happens, that this is the one that could be predicted, but you didn't know where it was going to happen. Hurricanes happen all the time. This is Hurricane Katrina, which is a huge hurricane that hit the southern US. And this is a story, I think, of community impact, where while Best Buy was impacted, we were impacted a little bit. Our stores were damaged, our employees were missing, and we did find all of them, and all of them survived the event. But it really was much more about how do you support the community. So one of the things we did very early was establish a war room that operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 months, where there was always a phone line open and anybody could call in and get answers to a question or get resources. We did crazy stuff. Like my secretary went out and bought 12 satellite phones and sent them to Louisiana because there was no phones. There's no plan that could say, have your secretary go buy 12 satellite phones and ship them to Louisiana. But, we empowered people to kind of make decisions. We created alliances with vendors and competitors. And one of the people that I know very well is currently the CEO of Walmart. And I called Doug and I said, what can we do? And they said, well, we're moving water and we're doing diapers and all of this amazing stuff. And we need a place to stage. Best Buy owns some property. We cleared the property of all the trees and it became a staging area that Walmart and other people used to bring product into Louisiana. I personally called Steve Jobs at Apple and I said, we need help. And he said, what do you need? Tell me. And, we started building tent schools and Apple shipped product into these schools. So all of this completely unplanned, but really amazing stuff. It was very brand positive. We donated an ultra wideband Wi-Fi system to the National Guard that was kind of an early precursor of some of the 5G stuff that's out there. We had these vans that said Best Buy on them. We had to paint them so they didn't say Best Buy on them. And the National Guard used our Wi-Fi system in Louisiana. We empowered management to do whatever was needed. So we had managers giving away all of the water and food in their stores. Now, not everything went perfect. We also had stores that made mistakes and started selling water for $30 a case because there was no water out there and we had to fix those things. But all of this really depended on people in the front line acting like leaders and over communicating. We kept all our employees on payroll, and eventually we found all of our employees. They're all over the country. And then, obviously we did a leadership tour to make sure that we were out and communicating with employees and letting the community know what's going on. And in the end, just like the Toys R Us example, we had very enhanced reputation, much stronger bonds with our suppliers, and even some competitors, where you'd be in industry councils and you had this different kind of relationship. So another example of taking something bad and making as good as you can out of it. So just a few things to follow up on, most important aspects: clear and focused communication, internal and external constituents need you. And really, it's about leadership and communication. And it's about being on the front lines and doing whatever it takes to lead in a situation. And this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, and it'll probably be around for hundreds of years. And it's an extraordinary example of what needs to be done in a crisis and what leadership looks like. And that's, to me, the plus alpha in every crisis situation is communication, being in the front line, activating the people that need to be activated, giving permission for people to act and make smart decisions. And all those decisions won't be perfect, but a lot of them will be fantastic. So with that, this is a little bit about who we are. I don't need to talk to this. I want to thank you. There's some resource lists in the back of the presentation. There's we publish a lot of stuff. If you're not subscribing to Rita's Sparks after Thought Sparks, you really need to do that. She publishes every week or two brilliant stuff. There's resources on Valize.com, a whole bunch of crisis resources here. And with that, I think I'm ending my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Open it to questions.
Yes, and we have questions already.
I can't see the question yet, so sorry.
You can see. I will read to you, okay?
Okay.
If it's okay. So we have the first question from Anna. Could you please mention risk assessment tools or frameworks you would recommend to us to use?
Yeah, so there's a couple in those links, and I think where I would start is on that page where kind of the 6 steps. And my experience, frankly, is that most of the risk assessment tools and frameworks are only as good as the people who actually implement them. And some of the best ones are made by people who are just smart people that know their business and know the culture of their company. And one of the things I didn't talk about is culture. in the three companies that I talked about all had very distinct cultures, but the cultures were, in all of those cases, very team oriented, meaning that they trusted the people on the front lines. They trusted the people who actually had to do the work to make tough decisions. So in 9/11, for example, we had employees stranded all over the country because no one could fly. And you can't have a travel policy that says you have to go through corporate travel and you have to do this, you have to do that, and you have to do the other thing. You just say, just do what you got to do to get home. We had people chartering buses to bring employees home. So there's some frameworks, and the links that at the end of this presentation have some great frameworks from the US federal government, from third parties. And I would say that they're all only as good as you are. And if you're willing to do the work, and if you go back to that page where I had the 6 steps, if you're willing to go through those 6 steps, you will have created a framework that works for your culture. And the other thing about crisis management is nobody thinks it's important until it's important, right? It's the important but not urgent. And then when there's a crisis, it becomes important and urgent. So if you've done some of the work, you will always do better in a crisis.
Thank you. The next question is from Olha. Ron, could you share your thoughts on what size or at what stage of company development we need to start preparation of crisis management plan?
So in most countries, there's regulation regarding some types of crisis management. In the US, if you're a public company, you have to have a plan for crisis management in order to continue operations of a business. But I would say if you're at a stage where you have more than a handful of employees, you can talk about what happens in an emergency or crisis management. And it can be as simple as having a phone tree. So if things go bad, I'm going to call person A, and person A is going to call person B, right? So everybody will know how we're going to communicate. It can be as simple as, for example, my wife has a couple of small businesses, and our crisis plan is as simple as all of her data is backed up in the cloud, and all of her data is stored in the cloud. And we've, on a couple of occasions, had to recover data from the cloud because we had unexpected problems with a computer or an employee or something. And simply thinking through what would happen if our data disappeared made us go, well, we can't keep our data on computers. They have to be in the cloud. So very, very simple. So I would say that at any stage, you should at least have an idea of what you would do in an emergency. And as you get bigger, you should become much more formalized in your plans. And in the US, it's called business continuity. I think in Europe, I don't know the phrase, but business continuity is probably very close to what it is. You're required to have a business continuity plan that says, in the event of my data center being wiped out by a tornado, here's how I would operate my business. Or in the event of New York being attacked, here's how I would operate my business.
Thank you. Next question. Again from Anna. Do you have any recommendations about the ways to work with the loss of sense of employees, decreased level of engagement and involvement? Sure, in this case, due to the emotional and personal experience caused by the war, but just, your experience from other crises.
Yeah, I mean, I can't obviously make anything even close to what you're experiencing, but what I can say is the best way to engage employees is to give them something important to do. I think your president has given a lot of people very important stuff to do, especially the men in the country. And simple examples of that is, for example, in the Best Buy example, telling the store managers who were devastated, their business was destroyed, right? And now what do I do? Well, we paid them to go out and do volunteer work. Everybody was paid, right? So go into your community and volunteer, organize your team to, distribute water bottles, to distribute, granola bars. So I think the best way to get people engaged in a crisis is to give them something important to do. And with lack of a business, for example, in the case of Best Buy, where the businesses were literally destroyed in Louisiana and Mississippi, you can't say, well, go to work. You can't say, go fix your store. let them work in the community, let them help somebody else. And in my opinion, there's no more important work than helping another person. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I've seen work in the past. And frankly, for me, that's what works for me, is go do something important. If you can't solve every problem, solve one problem.
Thanks. From Dmitro, trust factor. Have you had trust abuse? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, so in my experience, trusting people to make the right decision rarely ends up with a catastrophic problem. And I think in a large organization, especially in most, so if you get more than 100 people in an organization, so your tribe is typically less than 100 people that you're around every day. But in a large organization, more than 100 people, trust is a dynamic thing, right? One of the things that accelerates trust is crisis. You see how people really behave when they're under stress. And in my experience, when you say, do the right thing, the vast majority of people do the right thing. And when they do the wrong thing, the whole organization kind of recognizes that. So for example, with the water at Best Buy, when we said to Best Buy employees, do the right thing, most of them went to their stores and kind of broke through the doors or walked through the doors because they were blown off, put the water outside and it said free, right? And they donated the water, and they donated the candy bars and the granola bars and the stuff that was in the building, which was essentially valueless at that point, at least for the foreseeable future. And then we did have employees that their stores were still open. So they said, well, I can make a lot of money on water. So they put a huge price on a case of water. And very quickly, the organization kind of jumped on them and said, what are you doing? You can't do that. And the organization dealt with that. Nobody from headquarters had to call them and say, don't do that. Everyone around them said, stop, you're wrong. So I would say you take the risk. And in my experience, it's extremely rare that someone in a crisis shows that they didn't deserve your trust. And it's very minor, right? So what can somebody do to make it worse? Don't worry about that. Worry about what they're going to do to make it better.
Great. So the second question we have from Dmitro. Have you encountered cases with creative solutions in the middle of crisis that renders business not applicable?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, me too. I asked Dmitro, could you please, I think you're muted, but if you could write, put you out of business. Okay. So that was kind of creative solution in the middle of the crisis, but it didn't work. And have you had such cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, those cases are cases where people misunderstand the problem. So in the case of, for example, Superstorm Sandy hitting New York City, you would have employees trying to think they're trying to do the right thing. So hoarding generators or chainsaws or water, when in fact the larger organism wanted those items to go somewhere else. I can't say that I've experienced anything that was threatening to the business, right? So someone did something creative that was going to put you out of business. Because generally people are trying to do the right thing. So in none of these cases did anybody do anything that you would have said, well, if that continues, we're in trouble. In all of these cases, you had situations where people did things that you learned from. In the case of Sony, continuing to push decisions closer to the field became a mantra after 9/11, and we actually completely reorganized the field after 9/11 to put teams closer to the customers, support teams closer. Not necessarily because of 9/11, but it certainly didn't hurt that we had these experiences.
Thank you. So Dmitro wrote, but here for just, I wanted to read you the reactions. So Anna, to the question about how to encourage people in crisis, wrote to you, it is helpful and makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And Dmitro, to the question of trust, said great answers. Thank you. So it's really helpful. So guys, I encourage you to write your own questions. I have sure mine on the list, but use this opportunity as well. So Ron, you mentioned in one of your, I think, posts on LinkedIn that COVID-19 brought out a lot of good in people, communities and companies working together. Definitely we experience the same nowadays. How do you see it influence the world community, let's say like that, and if this effect can last longer?
I think what's happened now, specifically in Ukraine, has woke the world up. And I think we had this period in post-World War II where people wanted to believe that we lived in a new world where there was no evil people and no evil countries. And I think we got very, very comfortable with the fact that, with the idea that everyone's trying to do good. But I think it reminded people that different cultures have different values. And I think there's going to be a very permanent, very long-term shift. And when I say permanent, like if you think about that period from the end of World War II to the beginning of February, that's a pretty long period of, well, we live in a new world and we're all in this together. I think the next period will probably be the similar length of period where we say, we can't trust everyone. And the people that are like-minded democracies and people who think about, growing everyone in their community as opposed to growing the very rich or the very powerful will band together. And I think you saw that, if I understand your question correctly, I think you saw that with NATO as an example. I think, and the best example is Germany, that would never commit anything to anyone's defense for very good reason, right? So they were coming out of a much different place, now committing military support to another country, which they would never do before. So I believe this will fundamentally change the world for a very long time, which is why I believe that ultimately Ukraine will be successful, because I think it's opened billions of eyes to what can really happen. And if we don't all protect each other, then we're all going to be victims. And those are the kind of things that come out of crisis, those kind of fundamental changes in behavior. And I can tell you what happened with Katrina, with Best Buy, changed a lot of people in Best Buy forever. It was always a great company that loved their employees and cared for them. But, having to have a phone line open for months so that you found the very last person was a very, very fundamental thing that said that's more important than how much you sell today. And I think the world is kind of seeing that.
Okay. Dmitro has one more question, or it's like the clarification of the previous ones. My question is, how do you set the team's mind to work out a creative survival solution when your market suddenly freezes? So how do you put the team together, to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think trust is a very important part of that. I think leaders being on the front line and saying, and infusing the organization with confidence that we will find a solution. And I think I use that picture of President Zelensky for a very important point, which is nothing to do with Ukraine and everything to do with leadership and people. People want to know that the person at the top or the person leading them has a plan. And the plan can be sometimes, I'm going to make a plan, but we will figure it out. It doesn't have to be, I know all of the steps in the plan. But someone has to say, I'm in charge, this is what's going to happen, and we will figure it out along the way. And when he said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition, it told the whole world that he had a plan. And the plan was not to hide in, some small village. The plan was to be in the front lines. And I think in all of these cases that I've given from a business perspective, we did the same thing. When there was lead paint in toys, our first reaction was, my God, we're out of business. No one's going to come to the store now. And then we said, well, we've got to figure out a plan. And then the plan became, we have to lead in this problem. We can't be a follower. So we have to get ahead of Mattel and ahead of Hasbro and ahead of the federal government and say, this is what we should be doing. We met with senators all over the country, Amy Klobuchar, Dick Durbin. We met with, staffers in Congress. We met with testers at the CPSC. And we didn't have a plan, but eventually we had a plan. And I think the most important, my mother, my dearly departed mother, would say, do something, right? Don't just stand there, do something. Even if you don't know what to do, the act of starting to do something will help define that. And that's a key in a crisis. There's a reason people run away. It's the first defensive reaction. That's doing something. It's not always the best reaction, but you have to do something to begin to build the true plan. And that's why I said earlier on, when you look at those 6 steps, so I said, you're just kind of building an idea. You're not going to necessarily solve the problem, but the fact that you're going through those 6 steps prepares your mind to actually do something. And nobody anticipated planes hitting the World Trade Center. Nobody anticipated, lead in toys. But yet when it happened, we had an idea that we had a way to start doing something. Not a lot of people anticipated what's happening to Ukraine right now, but someone had a plan. They said, well, if that happens, we have to do something. Now they're figuring it out. And it's going, better than anyone expected. Still horrible, but better than expected. So.
Dmytro says, very clear and helpful answer. Thank you. I enjoy the practicality of it. And we also have one more comment: deep thoughts and useful information. Thank you. God bless America and Ukraine. So we have still a few more minutes for your questions. If you have any, I'll ask mine. Ron, we often say, and you mentioned as well, that all of the companies you lead were strong after crises. And, a lot of entrepreneurs really say, crisis made us stronger, our people stronger. But, there are many companies who don't survive crises. Usually we don't talk about them. Yeah. How to, maybe you somehow, followed the companies who didn't survive the crisis and what they did wrong that we, should keep in mind and don't do the same mistakes.
Yeah. So I think in general, companies and people who are damaged by crisis are not prepared for crisis. And in the case of most companies that fail due to a crisis, those crises tend to be financial crises, right? So they've taken too much credit. They've, not planned their resources properly, like inventory and people. They've made mistakes leading up to the crisis so that when they had a crisis, they fail. So going into 2008 and 2009, the financial crisis hit, many of the banks looked just like that. They were overextended, 30-1 on loans, over leveraged. They were planning like the world was always going to be wonderful. And then when the world wasn't wonderful, they failed. And the only reason they didn't go away is the US government pumped billions and billions of dollars into the banks to keep them from failing. And in fact, pumped billions of dollars into the global economies, into central banks and countries around the world to keep the world economic system from failing. So the ability of the US Treasury to print dollars, literally trillions of dollars, saved the day. But the only reason those companies didn't go out of business is they had a bad plan. When Bank of America was loaning at 40-1 against deposits, and then a crisis happens, they can't possibly cover their debt. So the US government gives them hundreds of billions of dollars so they can meet their obligations. And now there's whole new regulations. So it's always, in my mind, not always, most of the time, it is a failure to plan properly and plan your resources properly. As a family, if you look in the refrigerator and there's one little jar of peanut butter, you're not prepared, right? Or, you know, there's no gas in the car, or you have to be prepared to live your life, and businesses have to be prepared to live their life. And a bank at 40-to-1 leverage is not prepared. So they should have failed. I'm glad they didn't. Actually, I'm not that camp, but they should have failed. And the US government kept them alive and kept many, many, many businesses alive beyond banks when they went to the federal government for money. Same is true in COVID, not as severe though. So through COVID, because of what was done after 2008, the banks have had no issues whatsoever. They're very strong. There was no banking crisis. Even in the beginning of 2000, when it looked very bad, the banks were fine because now they were ready for what happened.
Oh, indeed, you know, crisis makes us stronger. At least we learn to plan better.
Yeah. No, in my experience, going through almost any crisis, whether it's business or personal, you're always stronger on the other side because you've done things that you didn't know you could do. Businesses do things they never imagined they could do. You know, at Best Buy, we never imagined that we would be creating an alliance with our biggest competitor to deliver water to Louisiana. We never in our wildest imagination, we say, oh, we'll work with Walmart, we'll clear all these fields, we'll make staging centers, you know, we'll distribute our Wi-Fi system. Never. And all of a sudden, of course you could do that. Oh, look what we can do like that. We can make that happen. It's pretty amazing. Same is true with people, especially with people. You know, you go through a crisis and you say, I never knew I was so strong. And then you're even more prepared and your children are more prepared because you're a stronger, better person.
I think that's, you know, the great ending for our meeting, you know, very inspiring words. I would just kindly ask who can switch on the camera to make a photo with Ron, you know, for our memory. I know that, you know, people can be in different circumstances. I don't insist, but in case you can switch on the camera and so that we see each other.
So do you want me to put the presentation in chat or just email to you and you'll distribute? What would you like to do?
Host should allow it first. Vlad, can you please allow? Is it possible or am I demanding something which is not possible? And as for the presentation, yes, please put it in chat. And also, if I have it on my email, we will distribute it.
Okay. Oops. Let me see. See if I can drag it in there. Ah, there it goes. And I'll email as well. Okay, I have to change my view to gallery, right?
Yes, yes. You will see already people, you know, not just.
Oh, God bless all of you. So nice to meet you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you again and again from all our community. It was really an insightful and helpful meeting, and thank you again for your support and, you know, for your readiness just from the first minute to be with us and to help us. And I hope we will stay in touch when everything is fine. You know, when we win, we will invite you to Lviv for sure.
I would absolutely, hold on, I'm saving my picture. I don't want to lose my picture. Hold on. I would absolutely love to stay in touch. If we can maybe meet again in 6 months or whenever, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. So this was my pleasure to do. God bless you and Ukraine, and we will keep fighting.
Sure. And we will be stronger after that, all of us.
I know you will. I know you will. Well, you will lead the world. Yeah.
Bye-bye, everybody. Have a safe evening and night.
Bye.